So I think we'll get started, and we'll be letting people in as they join. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Inspiring Era online event on integrating gender and intersectionality in research. I'm Helen Garrison from the Swedish non-profit organisation Public and Science, and we're actually a partner in both the Inspiring Era and the GenderActionplus projects that are involved in the organisation of the event today. Before we begin, there are just a few housekeeping notices. So firstly, we will be recording this event. None of the audience will be featured, just the speakers, and you will receive a link after the event to the page on the Inspiring Era website, where you will find a recording and the PowerPoints from today. We do have several opportunities for questions in today's programme, so please post your questions in the chat as you go along, and we will try to answer as many as possible. And also keep an eye on the chat too, because my colleagues will be posting various useful links along the way. I also just wanted to say a few words about the projects involved in today's event. So Inspiring Era is a Horizon Europe funded project working with the European Commission to support the implementation of the European Research Area Policy Agenda. And as part of this work, we are running mutual learning workshops and online events like this one, aimed at raising awareness of EU initiatives, tools and developments among those who can benefit from them directly. So if you'd like to receive details of forthcoming events and activities, we encourage you to sign up via the website, and you'll find a link in the chat. I also wanted to mention the GenderActionplus project too. The project's aim is to advance gender equality in the European research area, and it's been doing this through capacity building, policy exchange, coordination work between research funding organisations and national authorities, as well as developing strategic policy advice. And you'll be hearing today about some of the tools, the reports and resources that the project has produced. The project's actually coming to an end this month, but everything will remain on the project website. And plus, they've just launched a new mobilisation network for future advocacy to protect and advance inclusive gender equality in European research and innovation. So you're very welcome to join the network, and again, you'll find a link in the chat. We have over 400 people actually registered to participate today. So to encourage some interactivity and feedback between everybody watching, we're going to be using the Mentimeter tool. It's very easy to use via your computer or mobile, and there's various ways to access it. So you're going to see on the screen in a second a QR code, and you'll also find in the chat a link and so you can click on as well to get there, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code 38768680. So there's 3 different ways to find it. So please go in there and start asking the first question. So if we take a look at the first question, which country are you working in? So let's get a feel for who is participating today. Right. Fantastic. Lots of countries right across Europe. I think when I counted, we had participants from about 49 different countries, so beyond both Europe and beyond. Okay, fantastic. And if we go on to the next question. So regarding your professional background, so tell us which group that you belong to. So lots of researchers, lots of research support professionals. So as you can see, we've got a wide mix of participants today. Right, and if we move on to our third question. So how familiar are you with the concept of inclusive and intersectional gender analysis? So we've got some experts, we've got some people who know something about it, and some that nothing at all. So hopefully you'll be all learning a lot more about these concepts today. And if you move on to the fourth question, have you used these concepts in your work before? Lots of yeses there, great. Plenty of no's too. Great. So yes, brilliant. So thank you very much. That gives us a good picture of who is in the audience today. We're actually going to be using Menti again a bit later, so just keep that open. I'm going to just a different screen. So inclusive gender equality is obviously a key objective of the European research area, and to help set the stage from a European policy perspective, I am delighted to welcome Hanna Tenglerova, who's a policy officer in the gender sector at the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation. So Hanna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So my name is Hanna Tenglerova, and I work in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation in Unit Democracy, Equality and Culture. And I will introduce you briefly to the policy framework that covers the topic you will discuss later. Here we have the current political guidelines and priorities, which will shape the work of the current Commission. We see that gender equality is a strengthened priority for the Commission, and it should include focus on gender-based violence, empowering women in politics and labor market. And there are more gender equality strategy and other strategies that will be updated, and I will talk about it slightly later. We have gender equality and European values included also in European Union priorities and Commission priorities, as well as in Draghi report, which is very important for framing of the research policies. So here we have the overview of strategies adopted under previous European Commission mandate. There have been 6 equality strategies, with lots of them coming to the end and being updated currently. What is new is the European Roadmap for Women's Rights, which includes principles for gender equal society that emphasize the importance of gender-sensitive research and call for research and innovation to close the knowledge gap and addressing women's needs. There is also the annual report on gender equality published and a general report on the activities of the European Union. Here we have several Have Your Say published, so please do not hesitate to join and express your opinions, because we are now at the beginning of or in the process of creation of the upcoming equality strategies for the next period. The last one published was the Gender Equality Strategy consultation, so you see also the deadline, so please feel free to join and provide your input, because this is very important and valuable. Okay, let's go to the gender equality in the era. The gender equality and gender mainstreaming has been a priority of European research area since 2012, and it has been further affirmed by the package adopted by Competitiveness Council in 2021, which included also the ERA policy agenda for years 22 and 24. Here we have the priority or the action promote gender equality and foster inclusiveness, and one of its outcomes or the main focus of interest were to develop principles for the integration and evaluation of the gender dimension in research and innovation content. The output has been created in co-creation process in the subgroup of the ERA forum, and you will learn much more later on this publication from Lydia and Sofia. We have now, since last Friday, also adopted the new ERA policy agenda for the upcoming period, which has not the action on gender equality, but it's now structure policies, as it kind of like accepts the fact that gender equality is long-term priority and it's not longer short-term actions, but it needs sustained focus. So we have now the structural policy on gender equality labeled Strengthening Gender Equality and Inclusiveness in the ERA, notably with an intersectional approach. One of the outcomes, again, as a follow-up for the work that has been done under previous ERA policy agenda, is to focus on gender dimension in research and innovation content. And we, together with the subgroup, we will develop a monitoring and evaluation approach for increased uptake of the integration of the gender dimension in research and innovation content. Here we have, for your information, the overview of all outcomes that are planned. We plan to deliver during this period. And I would probably as well mention that in Horizon Europe, the gender dimension is the integration of the gender dimension into research and innovation content is a mandatory by default unless the core topic specified otherwise. And it is an award criterion under the excellence. We also have the gender dimension in research content and teaching as one of the recommended topic areas in gender equality plans. Here we have the latest publications, which include Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct and Framework for the Integration and Evaluation of Inclusive Gender Analysis in Research and Innovation, and impact of gender equality plans in the European research area. As well, there were also she figures published recently and some key figures on gender equality in Horizon Europe. You will have all the links available after this meeting. And this is all from me. If you want to stay connected, then please do so. And we also have a regular monthly news flash that that informs about the gender equality updates from our part. So please feel free to sign up for this news. That's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, if you have any question, I will stay for a while, but then I will have to leave. So I will wish you all the best for the discussion and for the presentation that will come up. Thank you very much, and over to you, Helen.
Thanks very much, Hannah, for that introduction. So now we are going to be learning more about the concept of inclusive gender analysis and the new framework that has been developed by the ERA Forum subgroup on inclusive gender equality. And I'm delighted to welcome two Gender Action Plus partners who've been involved in this work. So Lydia Gonzalez Maorta, who works at the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, and she's also Spanish national contact point for Horizon Europe for cross-cutting gender issues. And Sofia Ivarsson, a gender and innovation expert at Vinnova, Sweden's innovation agency, who's also been leading the Gender Action Plus's community of practice for research funding organisations. So Lydia, it's over to you first.
Thank you, Helen, for the opportunity to present the framework. I'm going to share. So now you can see it in presentation mode, right?
All good.
Perfect. So I'll be presenting the framework for the integration and evaluation of an inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation content that, as Hanna Tenglerova mentioned before, is an output of the ERA Forum subgroup on inclusive gender equality. GenderActionplus project, and particularly Work Package 4 on the gender dimension in research and innovation, and the RFO community of practice leader have been supporting and providing advice to a dedicated task force that was created within this ERA Forum subgroup in 2024 to develop precisely one of the expected outcomes of ERA Action 5. Hanna Tenglerova already mentioned the ERA policy agenda of the former period, 2022-2024. There was a specific action, Action 5, dedicated to the promotion of gender equality and fostering inclusiveness. One of the expected outcomes and deliverable of this Action 5 refer to developing principles for the integration and evaluation of the gender perspective in research and innovation content in cooperation with national research funding organizations. So the result was this framework, and its aim was to provide guidance to national authorities and funding agencies on policy measures to ensure the effective implementation and evaluation of the integration of the gender dimension in research and innovation content from an intersectional perspective, which is a cross-cutting principle now of all EU research and innovation policies. So it was basically setting common principles among all of us, all the representatives in the ERA Forum subgroup, member states representatives, associated countries representatives with competencies in gender equality policies in research and innovation, the Commission, of course, and also umbrella organizations. All of us trying to advance the agenda and agreeing on common principles to advance this domain of gender equality policies. So the structure of the framework consists of an introduction, some narrative on the policy context in which we are publishing this framework, the objectives, the progress achieved at national and RFO levels. This is a summary of the results of a benchmarking analysis produced by the GenderActionplus project. And then in this framework, we tried to identify the main areas of concern for all of us involved in this ERA Forum subgroup for the implementation of these policies, and deciding what kind of principles could help us to advance, to overcome these gaps already identified, and a final statement with the commitment. So I will mention very briefly the areas of concern and the principles you can check in the document, because I would like to spend a couple of minutes to introduce this term inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation content. In this framework, we made an effort to clarify key concepts related to this domain of gender dimension in research and innovation policies. As you may know, this consists of including sex gender variables or gender aspects in the research and innovation content through the whole research, through all phases of a research or innovation project. In the European framework, this is a matter of quality, a matter of control bias, avoiding gender bias, and also a matter of integrity of the scientific method as well. It is also a matter of orienting research towards the UN SDGs. The Commission considers that including this gender dimension in research and innovation has several advantages related to excellence, creativity, even business opportunities, since we consider all the needs of a diverse population. Within the Horizon Europe framework, the gender dimension in research and innovation and sex gender analysis have been used as synonyms. We in GenderActionplus for some time have also been using these both terms, the gender dimension in research and innovation and sex gender analysis, because sex and gender are the two basic concepts in this field. So sex, as you may know, refers to biological, physiological characteristics, while gender refers to sociocultural aspects and also gender identities. The Commission considers that gender is a multidimensional concept. So both concepts, sex and gender, comprise multiple aspects and need to be seen from a non-binary perspective. To have a deeper understanding on how the Commission defines and considers sex and gender, the most important reference is this report, Gender Innovations 2, where you can find the definitions, examples, even the implications for data collection. Another term we introduced in the framework, it is inclusive research, that refers to involving and considering diverse groups in the design of a research or innovation project to ensure that in the results, the outcome, the product of this project, their perspectives and needs have been considered. And then we have intersectionality, which was also mentioned before by Hanna Tenglerova. And as I said, it is a cross-cutting principle of EU policies. So intersectionality refers to considering other axes or factors of social inequality, for instance, racial or ethnic origin, socioeconomic status that may be intersecting with sex and gender and producing particular experiences of discrimination in our or inequalities in our society. So for the field of inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation, intersectionality refers to the object of study in our research and innovation projects. So the issue of intersectionality and all these debates around intersectional perspectives led to the emergence of new concepts trying to reflect this complexity. In our framework, we are working with the agreed concept inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation. To refer to the gender dimension in research and innovation from this inclusive and intersectional perspective, taking advantage also of the recognition of the term inclusiveness in the ERA Policy Agenda 2022-2024. And as we have seen, it will be also an important aspect of the upcoming ERA action dedicated to gender equality in the ERA Policy Agenda 2025-2027. So by inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation, we consider these three aspects. First, the traditional, let's say, sex gender analysis in the content of research and innovation through the whole research project. Intersectional factors of inequality that may be intersecting with sex and gender, and also including the need of including diverse target groups and end users in research and innovation projects. For instance, diverse patients in health projects as well. By using this term, we acknowledge the limitations of applying a mere sex-gender approach. We echo academic debates for many years on intersectionality, on gender and intersectional aspects. We embrace the Commission framework of intersectionality as a cross-cutting principle, and we promote as well the involvement of citizens, patients, and users of all genders in the development of new knowledge and solutions. So we think this is one of the most interesting contributions of this framework, trying to clarify concepts and also advance these terminological issues. So as for the areas of concern identified in the framework, very briefly, we highlighted the lack of a mandate at national level, for instance, targeting RFOs, but not only RFOs, also RPOs, higher education institutions, to implement these policies to promote an inclusive gender analysis. The need for comprehensive policies. This means that consider all phases in the design of a policy, not only one aspect, not only isolated measures to integrate an inclusive gender analysis, dealing with a variety of questions in application templates in different RFOs in different countries or funding schemes was also identified as an issue. They need to be equipped with proper indicators and proper and qualitative and quantitative indicators. And my colleague Sofia Ivarsson will mention this as well in a bit. Having the business enterprise sector on board, this means promoting an inclusive gender analysis in innovation content as well. And the need to consider an inclusive gender analysis as part of the debates around the reform of research assessment in Europe, and this is related to the COARA debates and developments in the last years. So the principles we agreed on include embracing an inclusive gender analysis, as I have explained before, the three aspects we include in this concept. A whole sector approach through national guidelines. This is another interesting principle because for many years, the gender dimension in research and innovation policies were considered the domain of RFOs. With this approach of a whole sector, we mean that RPOs need to consider as well an inclusive gender analysis, for instance, in teaching content, in their training, doctoral trainings for the future researchers, but also the business enterprise sector, as we have mentioned before, and scientific journals and their editorial policies as well, so that we achieve closing this circle, right, of the research and innovation and knowledge production. And then we have several principles that are related to the quality of the policies we will be working with. An effective monitoring and evaluation towards qualitative, not only quantitative, long-term impact. The consistency and comprehensiveness of RFO policies. This means from the design and description of the call or the topic until the evaluation of the funding program. Harmonizing procedures among research funding organizations to facilitate the work of the research community, for instance, reviewers, evaluators in the different funding schemes. Enhancing capacities to increase creativity in knowledge production. This means training, but not only for researchers, but targeting reviewers, and the staff of the funding agencies, for instance. And finally, considering inclusive gender analysis, an aspect of the quality of research projects when it comes to reforming the research assessment. In the end of the framework, you will see that the ERA Forum subgroup representatives recognize that renewed joint efforts are needed to make the most of this field. They fully endorse these principles, call on the support from national authorities and funding agencies to implement them, and urge to continue dedicating efforts in the ERA to advance these policies. So this, the agreement on these common principles and how to align our agendas and this explicit commitment is of high value in itself, I think. So the framework included several infographics as supporting materials for the work of research and innovation institutions that will be presented by my colleague, Sofia Ivarsson.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Lydia. So to advance the integration and the uptake of the inclusive gender analysis approach in research and innovation, it's important to have the research and innovation funding organizations on board. And for that, we have designed this framework for monitoring and evaluating the integration of inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation funding cycles. We start with infographics on the definitions, as already been mentioned by Lydia. So I think that we will just move on to the next page. Thank you. So to ensure a consistent integration of inclusive gender analysis in the research and innovation funding cycle, I will give you an overview of the step-by-step approach and then go into more into the detail of the framework for the monitoring and evaluation. But first, in the process and the research and innovation funding process, we have the design of the call. And in this phase, it is, of course, important to train the staff to give them an understanding and knowledge about the inclusive gender aspects and analysis that we expect from the applicants in the proposals. We have to specify in call text what gender and inclusiveness issues are related to the specific topic or the program. And we need to include inclusive gender analysis in the research and innovation funding as an evaluation criteria. And we should also encourage the contribution of gender expertise within teams. So in the application phase, we start by including the question on inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation funding. And as Lydia mentioned, we saw that one of the main areas of concerns were the diverse formulations of this question to applicants in the application templates. So we try to provide you with a common understanding and best practice on including this question. And as Lydia also mentioned, we see that this question must be followed up by two indicators, one quantitative and one qualitative, and I will return to that shortly. So the mode in which this question is formulated will allow us to collect disaggregated data on applications related to this specific question. Then we go to the promotion of the call. When we launch the promotion of the call, it's important to provide guidelines and material for applicants so that they can understand and have clear knowledge about what is expected with the integration of inclusive gender analysis in application templates. And preferably, we would like to recommend to nominate a contact point to support the applicants on this issue. Next slide, please. So when we come to the evaluation of the proposals where this question is applied and required to answer by the applicants, we need to provide training and guidelines for the evaluators that are going to assess the proposal and assess the analysis and the motivations given by the applicants. And we recommend to have gender expertise in the evaluation panels and include a specific section in evaluation summary reports. In the funding decision, it is important to include inclusive gender analysis as part of the overall assessment of the proposal. This is one of the aspects that the evaluators has to take into account and to integrate in their overall assessment of the quality of this proposal. And when we come to the monitoring and evaluation, we need to define the indicators that we will use to monitor and evaluate throughout the whole funding cycle. We need to collect both quantitative and qualitative data and publish monitoring and evaluation data and results. And by doing all this, we come to the policy evaluation, where we need to use mixed methods and indicators, and preferably to count on gender experts in order to look at how this turned out and, if necessary, make adjustments. We also need, which is very important, to be able to show the impact of integrating the inclusive gender analysis into the project. So this is an overview of the step-by-step approach in the funding cycle. And if we go a bit more into detail to this framework for monitoring and evaluating the integration of inclusive gender analysis in the funding cycle, we have structured this in terms of the two indicators that we recommend is used, that is both the quantitative and the qualitative indicators, followed by a description of the objective. What do we want to achieve with these two indicators? And then the mechanisms. How are we going to apply this objective for the monitoring and evaluation process? So for the quantitative indicator, this is a simple yes and no check in the box indicator. And we use this to monitor the proportion of applicants acknowledging the relevance of inclusive gender aspects in the content of their project proposal. And the objective with this is to monitor the proportion of applicants who answer yes and no simply. And so the mechanism to achieve this is that the proposal templates should include a mandatory question asking very simple yes, no, if applicants find that the inclusive gender analysis is relevant to their research in innovation proposal. So the applicants need to indicate a yes and no answer, but importantly, they also need to justify, to provide an analysis or a motivation to both the yes and the no answers. And this is helpful for the data collection to track the responses, to assess how many applicants are addressing relevance of inclusive gender analysis across different fields? Are there any gaps in specific research fields, in different programs, and also in different sectors in society? And the qualitative indicator is, of course, to evaluate the quality of this motivation or this analysis provided by the applicant. And the evaluation criteria here is the quality of the analysis. Is it addressed based on its relevance, depth, and coherence with the project's goal? A thorough analysis of the motivation for a negative answer is also very important. So for the evaluators, they have to evaluate both the motivations or analysis of the yes and the no answer, but also look at those answering yes to assess the quality of these analyses in the overall assessment of the proposal. So the monitoring of the quantitative indicator has to continue during the project life cycle. So during the project, we need to track those that claim that there is a relevance and they will integrate it in their project. And that is done preferably by periodic reports from the funded projects, so we can compare what was said, what was the attention in the application proposal, and how is this taking on in the progress of the project. And we need to assess the qualitative indicators in terms of the depth of the engagement, to check whether gender analysis remain consistent, relevant, and informed during the project implementation. And if it's not, then we have to provide feedback. And in our experience at Vinnova, we see that there is quite a gap here in the application phase, where applicants tend to answer yes to this question, but then during project time lose the engagement, or we see that these dimensions tend to weaken. So it's very important to continue this monitoring throughout the project life cycle. Next, please. So just to finish, this feedback loop is important because it helps us to make improvements, to identify gaps. For example, when we identify that the relevance of inclusive gender analysis is strong in some fields and some sectors, but very weak in others, then we need to address that in terms of targeted communication, workshops, trainings. But we also need to evaluate the evaluators process to see that they actually take the analysis and the integration of these aspects into account in the evaluation. We need to address common challenges, for example, the confusion or conflation with gender balance. We see in our projects, for example, that almost 1/4 of all the applicants, they answer yes, these aspects are relevant, but the motivation and the analysis is about the gender balance in the project team. And that is not what we want to achieve here. So maybe we need to make adjustment in how we post these questions in the application templates. And we also need to ensure that the evaluators and applicants are informed about the difference between simply answering yes and providing thorough research-based inclusive gender analysis and how these indicators are evaluated. And then, of course, we need to assess project results. What was the outcome by integrating these aspects in the overall project results? Beyond compliance, we need to assess how the inclusion of inclusive gender analysis actually contributed to the scientific, social, or economic impact of the project. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sophia and Lydia. We now have some time for some questions. So if you have any questions for Lydia and Sophia, please post those in the chat now, and we will take some questions. There was a question relating to access to all the PowerPoint slides. So for those of you missed earlier, saying yes, all the PowerPoint slides will be available, and as well as a recording of the event today. I'm going to be publishing those on the Inspiring Era website, along with lots of all the links, because there's been lots of links in the chat too. So they will be published on a special page, and we will be emailing you to let you know with that link when that is available. So yeah, just looking at the chat. Questions?
Can be comments as well.
Or comments.
How
yes,
you see
comments.
this framework, the difficulties of, or the potential.
Here we go. So we have a question. Here, so yes, thank you for your insightful presentation. It's reassuring to see that Europe is actively prioritising gender and intersectionality in research and innovation. I'm concerned about the shifting landscape of gender-related issues in the United States. Given that many research topics and collaborations are international in nature, could this lead to tensions or conflicting approaches with American university researchers? And how could we address potential conflicts within Europe itself, where perspectives on gender and intersectionality may also differ? So that's quite a long question, but Lydia, Sophia, would you like to make a comment? You're muted,
Well,
Lydia. Oh, there we go. Sophia,
yeah. Yes, I think that we all know about this situation and the concerns around this situation, and while we don't see any definite results of eventual collaboration with the US, I think, and I see that in the ERA Action 5 subgroup, we are discussing these issues, and we see that it is very important that Europe stands strong on these issues and not to weaken the ambition. I think that is the first important statement and decision to make on this issue. And I think that we have actually seen some resistances towards this dismantling of the issue.
And if I can add, as Hanna Tenglerova said at the beginning, we will be working in the upcoming years within this ERA Policy Agenda 2025-2027, where inclusiveness and intersectionality is ensured as a cross-cutting principle for gender equality policies in research and innovation.
Thanks, Lydia. There's another question here regarding, are all national funders going to take this recommendation regarding inclusive gender equality in research and innovation? So perhaps when you can answer how the recommendation framework is going to be taken up.
Well, in the framework, we stressed the role of the national authorities and the national level in coordinating these policies. We suggested the potential of having national mandate for research funding organizations, as we have in the case of Sweden, to advance these policies. Moreover, in the upcoming period, there will be an action or an expected outcome of our action on gender equality to have more concrete indicators to develop these principles and to work on these principles in cooperation with funding agencies. So we hope that more funding agencies will be working with these principles and ensuring this their implementation.
Right.
I don't know if you, Sophia, want to
do you
add
want to anything or not? No,
okay.
fine. Good. And there's another question which Sophia I think could answer as well, because it's particularly to do with sort of supervision and training of evaluators. But so the question is there any specific supervision of evaluators on these issues, given that given that their perception and appreciation of the notions of gender inclusion and intersectionality in particular may run counter to European wishes? So Sophia, would you like to? And that's related to the second question, I think, below, about how do you ensure that evaluators have sufficient expertise? So it's all to do with training of evaluators.
Well, there is this tool for gender NCPs, but I think it's very useful also for training evaluators, and Lydia will present that very soon. So I think that we have, through the projects that like GenderActionplus, the Inspiring project, a lot of tools and training material that could be used. But I also want to say that this framework is quite recently published, so going into some formalized training material would be the next step that the EU Commission hopefully could provide to secure that trainers have a minimum level of training on these matters. But how to secure, I can refer to what we are doing at Vinnova. We use AI to monitor and classify the analysis, the motivations on this mandatory question. And we saw, for example, in these analysis that applicants applying for innovation projects using AI presented quite an astonishing low quality in their analysis and motivations, which of course is, and we specifically have a section on this in the framework on the importance of integrating these aspects specifically in emerging tech and in AI. So we targeted these evaluators to train them specifically on how to evaluate the inclusive gender analysis in AI proposals. So with this AI tool that we use to rank and to classify and to monitor the quality of applicants' analysis and motivations, we can actually target the programs and calls where we see weaknesses, and then we can go in there and provide extra training for these evaluators.
Thanks very much. And I think we just got time for just one more question. There's a question relating to how much in practice there's non-binary dimension of gender evaluated at this point in funded projects and overall. So any practical steps or dimensions of measuring particular non-binary. So do you have, Sophia, or Lydia? Lydia, yeah.
Yeah, I think we would agree on the limitations of this approach, still continuing a binary approach in many of our research and innovation institutions. Indeed, in one of the workshops we organized last year in GenderActionplus with some of the most advanced or experienced research funding organizations, some of them told us that when they tried to go beyond this binary approach, some resistances emerged. So there is still a lot of work to do in this sense. We have tried to recommend funding programs on gender studies and intersectionality that can help us to produce knowledge and to produce more examples for researchers as well that go beyond the binary. I also think that from the health field, in many countries, there has been an effort, at least in the data collection, to go beyond the binary and to include more than two options when designing questionnaires and collecting data. So this has been a promising practice. This is something we all can keep in mind when collecting data. And there is also an LGBTIQ equality strategy of the European Union for the period 2020-2025 that calls on Horizon Europe funding on health to consider, for instance, to develop research to consider health issues that affect trans people, for instance. So having this kind of, new research can help us to have more examples and insights on the topic. But yeah, we would agree on the limitations so far.
Thanks very much, Lydia. It's now time to move on. So thank you both, Sophia and Lydia. And now I'm delighted to welcome Erika Jonsson, Professor of Gender and Society at Linköping University in Sweden. So Erika has a interdisciplinary background in sociology, gender studies, and science and technology studies. And today she'll present a use case and share her research on the intersectional hallucination of synthetic data. So a warm welcome to you, Erika.
Thank you. First, I want to check, can you see my screen? I think so.
Yes. All good. We can hear you and see you. So brilliant.
Okay, good. Then I'll just start. So yeah, thank you for that introduction. And today I'm going to show an example of some AI research that I've been doing, which benefited immensely from an integrated intersectionality perspective rather than just a gender studies perspective. And I'm going to do this for an audience which I realize has a lot of understandings of gender studies and also intersectionality. So I probably don't have to explain that very much, but this is an example of an interdisciplinary project where I worked with some machine learning experts on the production of synthetic data. Don't worry, I'll go into explaining what all of that is, and did it in a way that tried to help them think through the concepts of intersectionality at the level of how can we let these understandings actually impact the research we produce, rather than how can we try to get a more intersectional team put together. And so I'm going to talk about that. The two pictures that you see on the screen right now are just a teaser. I'll be talking about them later on in the presentation, but they are an example of where in Sweden you have the most adults with a university education degree. And then the little bubbles on those pictures are breaking them down by gender and I think income level as well. It's very small. So you look at them. Anyways, interesting, two different ones and two different places where we see in Sweden those people. And why that is what this talk is going to be about. But let's start here. Synthetic data. I am sure you all saw the picture of the fake Pope that came out a few weeks ago. And that is an example of synthetic data. It's an example of how AI is being used, generative AI, to create images, generated images that are fake. So fake news, fake data, fake images, that's kind of what synthetic data is about. But it can take many forms. So all of these images that are flooding your social media feeds that look generated and probably are, that's synthetic data. Also, all of the texts that, if any of you have students, are appearing in their essays that are generated from ChatGPT or other text large language model generators, that's also synthetic data. So all the words that these AI large language models are producing for us that we read and understand as cohesive, coherent texts, but are just actually words put together or anyways, that is also synthetic data. Now, the type of synthetic data that I've been working with is like Excel documents on steroids. So numerical data. You can also use AI to synthetically generate numerical data that is fake, but allegedly very similar to the original data. So these are all just sort of different formats or appearances that synthetic data can take. Why would you want to make synthetic data? Well, I mean, I guess because you want to see what you would look like as Pope would be one answer, or because you want to write your essay really quickly and don't want to bother reading the article. Okay, answer number 2. But why would you make synthetic data that's like quantitative Excel documents that was synthetic? Well, because we right now live in a world where we have lots of regulations around how data can be used and stored and shared and what we can do with it. And a lot of that has to do with regulations from privacy. And that's very important regulations. So we should definitely keep them in place. We have like GDPR regulations, also very important. We have lots of different nation states and regional regulations about which data we can transfer over which borders. We also have internally, within universities, academic structures, research bodies, a lot of times commercial organizations will have regulations about which departments can share data with what other departments. All of these reasons, or all of these regulations, protect and limit what you can do with your data in terms of who else can see it and where you can share it. And so if you had synthetic data, you could make data that gets around those regulations. And as long as you have that data that represents the original data but is fake, like not just anonymized, but like fake, but still similar to the real data, then you can get around these regulations and use it in different places. An additional reason for using synthetic data is because right now, everybody and their brother wants to use machine learning algorithms to like refine out the truth of the world in large amounts of data. But you really need large amounts of data to do that. So say if you have some data that, probably has a truth in it that you want to figure out that you didn't know, find correlations and pretend that that's causality, then you could probably you would need more than the amount that you probably have. So if you could generate synthetic data that's based on your original data, but slightly different and new, but fake, and then you could add it together, you can do what's called amplifying your data, or using synthetic data to make a bigger data set, and then you can run a bunch of machine learning algorithms in that and try to figure out what's going on. So there's reasons to use synthetic data. Some of them have to do with the regulations we have in place around data now. Some of them have to do with really legitimate concerns for privacy. And some of them have to do with the new tools of AI that we want to use on data, which requires lots and lots of data. There is another reason to use synthetic data, and that is that we have data now that is probably not very well balanced. We know that we have lots of data sets that maybe only represent largely male bodies in medical data, and we would like to add more female bodies into that data set. So there's an idea that we could, by using synthetic data, produce and balance these existing biased data sets so that we have a less biased data set to then train people, machines, algorithms on. And in that sense, we think about using synthetic data to sort of fix the known biases or problems with the world. Women and heart attacks is a very common example about that. What if we could just get more data on how women's bodies present with heart attacks? Then it would be easier to, notice them and cure them, and we wouldn't have an over mortality of women who present with heart attacks. Or if we could make different facial skin colors for facial recognition algorithms so that they don't necessarily recognize white faces better than darker skinned faces. Or if we had wanted to make some policy about some sort of social program, and we wanted to use the data to imagine what it would be like if we had more equitable income distribution between groups. If we could synthesize data to represent that, then we could use that as a way of trying to imagine a better world and working towards it. These, I think, are really, really great goals. But, and here's my big but, it turns out that synthetic data has some issues. One of them is that when generating synthetic data with the standard tools out there, which includes like generative adversarial networks, which is a particular type of machine learning algorithm, but even to some extent diffusion models, we have a situation where the things that are very common in the data set tend to be amplified in the synthetic data set. So now I'm going to be talking about the difference between real data sets and synthetic data sets. So try to hang along. It's not that hard, I promise. But edge cases, or things that are already in a minority representation, tend to go missing in the real data set. Now, given that I'm a professor of gender studies and I've worked a lot with medical humanities, so medical data, where I know that there are lots and lots of data sets where we have an underrepresentation of women, we have almost no representation of non-binary bodies or trans bodies, and we have an overrepresentation of male bodies. When I started hearing about this particular problem with edge cases going missing, I thought this was a big potential problem. So I got together with a machine learning expert, Dr. Sagi Haji Sharif, and she and I started working with generating synthetic data and seeing what actually happens, checking if these edge cases do go missing. So we did that with the 1990 US population data, the adult population, because that's open access, there's loads of it, and many people use it in these domains. So it's very, like, people understand what it is. And Sagi, and I'm going to tell you, it's Sagi, it's not me. I am a professor of gender studies. I'm not good with computers, but she and I worked together, and she started making a whole bunch of different versions of synthetic versions of that population data, and then checking to see, do the edge cases really go missing? And yes, in the standard models, when we would use them, the edge cases really went missing. So for example, in the original data, we had 40 different countries of origin. The majority of the data points in that data set were born in the USA, but there were people born in Cambodia and Canada and Nicaragua and the Vietnam. And when we looked at one of the synthetic data sets that she generated with the CT-GAN, which is one of the standard generative adversarial networks, we saw that there were only 31 countries of origin in the synthetic data. So people who had been born in Honduras, Hong Kong, Hungary, Ireland, Laos, Scotland, Thailand, Trinidad, Tobago, and Yugoslavia in the original data set were not represented in the new synthetic data set. And I say represented, but it's actually kind of a weird term, and I'm not quite sure what term to use, because it's not like they were in one data set and then represented in another. The synthetic data set is a completely fake but new data set, but there weren't data points with these country of origin in the synthetic data set. So we started checking to see what other edge cases went missing, and in all of the different attributes, edge cases went missing. But Sagi, being an engineer, was like, well, okay, but why don't we just do this better? So she went and identified all the edge cases and then trained the model in such a way that, and tweaked it so that she was able to make sure that the edge cases that she was keeping her eye on were represented in the synthetic data. So lesson number 1. Okay, edge cases, be that women and men, or be that country of origin, or whatever you've got, be it like leaf size, if you have some sort of like, tree data set, you can figure out how to keep the edge cases in there, but you have to know which edge cases you're looking for in the first place. The other thing that we found, though, is a bit more complicated, and that is, which intersectionality is this great theory to help us understand. It turns out we are much more than just our country of origin, or just our gender, or just our age, or just our educational level. Our subject positions in society are shaped and affected and afforded by multiple power dynamics working in society. And if we don't take into consideration the intersections of all these power dynamics and only look to see and imagine representation as a single attribute aspect, then we are going to miss the complicated relationships between countries of origin, gender, education level, age, income, all these things in a population data, or leaf size, tree, climate of growing in. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of domain you're working in, you're going to miss the relationships between the columns in your structured data. And, at some level, to me, I'm like, this is just pretty normal to think about, right? Like, why do we put data in columns? Well, because we think that these columns say something to each other, and organizing them that way is going to tell us about these relations. But they're relationships that we don't necessarily always know in advance. So there's, I think, one of the really tricky things. We don't always know what the relationship between country of origin and gender is in relationship to education level, for example. We might speculate about it, but it's the columns and their relations that tell us that. So why is this important to the work that we do? Well, because when we started looking at intersections of different columns in the data, in the synthetic data and the real data, it turns out those relations were there was weird things happening with them in the synthetic data. So now this very terrifying graph that you see, that I will now explain so it doesn't look so scary after a while, is a visual representation of 3-point intersections in the data that we were using, and a comparison of those exact same 3-point intersections in the synthetic data that we generated. So the bottom left triangle with the white backgrounds, those are 3-point intersections of these real 1990 census data. The grayer ones in the upper right are the synthetic data. And then these bar graphs in the middle are a comparison between the real data and the synthetic data at the single attribute level. And what we see is that, for example, here in this square, we can compare the age in the real data and the synthetic data. And we see that there's a pretty good statistical representation in the synthetic data of the age distribution in the real data. The brown is the overlap, so that's where it's the same. And now they're not identical, and this is really good because with synthetic data, you absolutely do not want it to make identical reproductions of your data, because then it's just like a mirror of your data. Then you don't have synthetic data. It won't help you get around any of those rules, and it won't help you balance anything out. But it should be a little different, just not too different. And here we see that at the age column, it is different, but not too different. It's probably good. And if you look at each of these little single column ones in the diagonal, you see that actually the synthetic data here is doing a pretty good job of representing the statistical distributions for each of these columns. But what happens if we look at the intersectional level? So for example, here are age, income, and gender represented in a 3-point visualization. So income is on the y-axis. It's binary level in this data set, so it's high or low. Age is along the x-axis, and then gender is pink and blue. On the left hand is the real data, on the right hand is the synthetic data. And here we can sort of visually see that there's a pretty good representation at this 3-point intersection between age, income, and gender in the synthetic data. But what about down here at occupation, marital status, and gender? Here we can see that the synthetic data, the one on the right, has actually quite a bit more pink, sort of in the middle of the image. What is that doing, and why are we doing that? So this is marital status along the bottom, occupation of several different types along the y-axis, and then gender, of course, in the beginning, or in the colors. And what we see is that in the 1990 data, there was one data point that was female husband. Now, this is 1990 US data, so it could be a data entry problem. People at the census in 1990 got to write in their own categories by hand. So it's possible that there was somebody who said, you know what, I'm female, but I'm actually the husband in this family. I'm going to put that down. Totally possible. Not legal, but possible. Or it could just be, most likely, like I was saying, a data entry point. But in the 1990 US Census data synthetic version, so like a reproduction of that data, but synthetic, we had 259 female husbands. Now, there are very many different explanations for why this might have happened, and Sagi's been working on them and trying to figure it out. But one thing it really demonstrates is that at the intersectional level of synthetic data generation, we end up with what we're calling in our work intersectional fidelities and intersectional hallucinations. And the other thing we're trying to say with this work is that it is not sufficient to think and test your synthetic data at the simple, like single attribute level, which would be in the conversation that we're having today, for example, trying to see if it like represents women and men in a either unbiased way or in a way that, mirrors the original data. I mean, it's a great thing to look at, but it's not sufficient. We also have to look at what's happening at the intersectional level if we want to be able to see these intersectional hallucinations and intersectional fidelities. And the reason to do that is because it turns out those things are really important. So for example, this data set, the synthetic one, if you were going to use it to add to your original data set and amplify it for policy decisions, it might be really good for using if you're looking to look at policy that's related to age, income, and gender. But it might not be such a good idea to use it if you're going to be looking at occupation, marital status, and gender issues. So knowing your synthetic data's intersectional hallucinations is going to be really important for knowing what to use it for and what not to use it for. Now, here's another slide of exactly the same stuff, but with a diffusion model generated synthetic data that Sagi did, because she wanted to see if she could make it better. And she could. You see that we have much fewer hallucinations in this. And We only had 68 points that were both husband or wife and also single, which in the original data original synthetic data, we had, I think, 333 of those points. So she had managed to use different AI tools to make more representative, intersectionally representative synthetic data, which is great. But it also means it's probably not as good for privacy, for example, or other types of getting around regulation. And you have to find some sort of sweet spot between having intersectional hallucinations and then having useful data and what those uses are for. Anyways, that's a long conversation, not something we want to have here. But what it does show us is that this type of analysis, which had not been done before, when people had been looking at biased synthetic data, they were only looking at the single attribute level, like, only trying to figure out if you have gender representation in your research projects, and not at the intersectional level. And this is why intersectionality is really important. Here are those two images that I showed you on that first slide again. And on the left-hand side is a visualization of where in Sweden we have the most adults with a university degree, according to the official Swedish statistics. And on the right-hand side is an image of where in Sweden we have the most adults with a university degree, according to a synthetic version of Swedish statistics that Sagi made when we were working with this project. And you can see that it shifts from being in the Stockholm region to being in the Östergötland region, which is fine with me because I live in Östergötland and I think that's great, but would not be fine if we were trying to make policy decisions about university places and where to put funding for different types of, innovation efforts, for example, in Sweden, and we were basing it on synthetic data. Even though the synthetic data might be great because it was much more privacy secure and, could be shared and used around different ways, but it was probably going to be giving us the wrong data around that specific question. So where have we gone with this? Thanks to a lot of really great funding that we've gotten from Vinnova and other innovation areas, we've been able to take this research and turn it into a policy document by working together with the Swedish National Data Service and making recommendations for the types of metadata and readmes that we need to have for synthetic data. That actually includes an intersectional analysis on synthetic data. I have to admit, when I'm out talking with my AI bubbles about intersectionality and doing intersectional analysis of synthetic data, it is, just like I'm sure most of you encounter in your work, an uphill battle, first trying to define what intersectionality is and why it's important. But by using this example, I'm also able to show how actually it has really huge implications for the production of the actual science. That is, the production of how we are using AI to generate synthetic data, and that we need to think in terms of complex intersectionalities if we want to do it in a way that might have any chance of even representing the real world. And then we've also managed to, the black square over there, create a software program that will allow people who are generating software data to analyze their data and compare it to the original data. And then do that specifically around selected intersections in it that they have to makes them think through what might be the important relations in the first place, and then create visual representations of those hallucinations and fidelities. It's probably not something you're interested in, but it is an example of how we've been able to take this one concept of intersectionality, apply it to an AI subdomain that was missing it and really needed it, and then turn that into both policies for the production and documentation of synthetic data, and also a little software product that maybe people could use to help them do that. And I have not done this alone. So I want to say a big shout out to Dr. Sagi Haji Sharif, who's done all of the machine learning work, and to all of these funders. And you probably recognize some of them, not all of them. And there, because I can't help it, I'm actually a professor of gender studies. I've got a QR code to a reading list where, if you're interested in fairness, bias, and AI stuff, there's lots of really interesting texts that aren't super complicated, but you might find interesting. So anyways, that's all I've got. Thank you very much. Maybe there's questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Erica, for that fascinating presentation. And we are going to have opportunity to ask Erica some questions. Before we do, we just wanted to go back to Monty and ask you, the audience, a couple more questions. So if you've got Monty still open, or we will put the link into the chat again, so you can find that. So the question is, what do you see as the benefits of applying an inclusive intersectional analysis? So let's have your thoughts on that. So yes, my colleagues put the link into the chat if you need that. There we go. Answers coming through. Erica, do you want to make any comments on those? Better science, better research.
Yeah, I think all of these are great. I mean, of course, that's very true. But also, I'm not sure if I've seen any one of these, probably it's there, but also trying just to recognize that we have so many different power dynamics at play in society. And if we want to be inclusive, which is, basically what all of feminism started out with trying to do, we'll have to do it in a way that recognizes beyond our own identities and tries to see other people's identities. Just basic trying to be a good person with some sort of social justice impetus in the background.
Great. Thanks. And if we move on to our next question, it's what do you see as the challenges of applying inclusive and intersectional analysis? So here we have, researchers not trained, disinformation.
Can I make a comment on there too?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think all of these are actual real challenges, definitely for sure. One of the things that I also think is like a real challenge is that, well, there was one that was like mistrust of the concept. I think that mistrust can stem from the fact that an intersectional analysis really challenges each and every one of our privileges, and most of us are in really privileged positions. For those of us who are in a place where we can spend an afternoon talking about this, and for those people that we then use our jobs to go out and talk to about this, they're obviously very privileged, and trying to point out that their privilege is based on more than just, what they have in their underwear, but is probably based on things like all of their other power structures around them, including their race and their class, and that these are things that they were born with. They can't change it. That's very true. But that, we need to start thinking about how they've benefited us, all of us, myself included, in very specific ways. It becomes challenging. And so we have to get past this, having our privilege hazards pointed out to us and the deeply uncomfortable position that puts us in, myself included. I find it very, very uncomfortable. But that uncomfortable, we have to find ways to work through that. And sometimes that takes a long time and a lot of hand holding. And we don't necessarily have time to do that in like a half of a page of a policy, like of an application call, so that people can then, make an intersectional analysis of it. So all of that really demanding, emotionally demanding work of trying to get the people around us to understand their positionality and how that can be impacting their research in ways that they haven't even considered before is really hard to do when writing a call or evaluating an application. But it needs to be done. It probably needs to be done outside of the application call process and in the application processes. It's hard. God, the emotional labor we do. All of you guys in this area that are at this, the emotional labor you do to help people figure that out. Ilaj, it's great. Good luck. Makes me want to go back to bed some days, but good job.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Erica. And thanks everyone for your input as well. Right, we have a question in the chat. So it was to Erica, how did you develop those synthetic data sets? What were you guided by? How do you ensure that these synthetic data sets are close to being representative? So that's a good question.
Yes, so I'm putting in the chat an article. If you want a deep read on that, we just had something published in Big Data and Society that specifically talks about that and the ontological choices that we had to make and the politics behind those ontological choices. You know what, I'm going to put in a different one too. That first one's a deep read. This one is a much shorter. It's in the conversation. It's much easier to access if you just want a short read. Here's one. And the simple answer is we used lots of different methods. We used lots of different ways, and we had to consciously think about what we were doing with it. And I think this is one of the main points of our work that we just want to pound home again and again, is that we were making synthetic data sets from the original one using slightly different tweaked models, and the data became different every time. And then when you would use a different method, like going from GANs to diffusion models, it also made it very different. But the main takeaway there is that the synthetic data was different every time. And it will be different every time. And sometimes Sagi knew why it was different. And sometimes she was just like, wow, I did this exactly the same way and it's different. Why is that? And we didn't know. Maybe someday we'll know. We don't know now. But the important thing from there is to realize that that data then is unique and it's representing it's re-representing the data, which the data claims to be representing the world, and there's a lot of tension in that representation itself, which we could totally go into, but we aren't. But you know, we're making synthetic data, which is re-representing the data differently each time. So we have to know where those differences are, which means we also have to think when we're making synthetic data, how can we make bespoke data that is actually going to be useful for our specific research questions or policy decisions or whatever it is we're doing it for? And how can we try to work against the discourse currently out there that says you could just make synthetic data and then it would be useful for everything because it's like, you know, now anonymous and fake. Because it's not, it's different, it's unique, and we have to think about that. We need a vocabulary for it. This is why we're coming up with intersectional hallucinations and fidelities. We need policies for it. This is why we were writing those policy documents that, you know, about like for open science, you know, for data repositories, what should they require in the metadata and the readmes? And we just need to go out and talk ourselves blue in the face about the situatedness of synthetic data. I find it really amusing that I'm suddenly going back to Donna Haraway and situated knowledges and applying that to synthetic data. But I think for those of you who are in the field, Lucy Suchman and her work on AI as a empty signifier would be going along with this idea too. There's a lot to learn from early feminist technoscience when we're approaching what STS or what AI is doing right now. And we need to use these tools that we have and talk about it that way.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? Feel free to post them in the chat. I don't see
Thank
any
you.
just now.
I see. Oh, you put that one. Yeah, that's right.
We've
Yes.
been posting some more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Links, and we will. Just a reminder: all these links will be collated. Some of them are already there, and any of the other ones that have come up during today's event, we will add to our resources page afterwards. So don't worry about having to copy them all down. Great.
Thank you guys for listening. I love talking about this, so thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Erica, for your fascinating presentation. So thanks very much. So I think we'll move on now, and I would like to welcome Lydia back to present some of the exciting new tools to support inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation that have been developed by the GenderActionplus project. So Lydia, over to you.
Sorry, I'm trying to share again. Okay. Okay, here we are. Okay, so just a couple of tools we have developed in GenderActionplus to support an inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation. So the first one that should be mentioned are the infographics as annexes that we can find in the framework for the integration and evaluation of an inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation that Sofia Ivarsson presented before. And we have produced a couple of policy papers that may be useful for your work in research and innovation institutions. Last year, we published a position paper on the on supporting gender expertise among Horizon Europe national contact points for better results on inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation in Horizon Europe. We basically argued that our national NCP structures need to be equipped with more gender expertise in order to provide a more professional advice to our researchers and to have better proposals in terms of the integration of sex gender analysis and an intersectional perspective as well. So in this paper, you will find several sections explaining the narrative behind and the evolution of the gender dimension of research and innovation policies in Europe. This is quite brief, and I think it can be useful to understand how it is considered in Horizon Europe, what is in intersectionality in the framework of Horizon Europe, what is sex and gender, and how it will be evaluated in our research and innovation proposals. We also dedicate some paragraphs to this traditional confusion Sophia mentioned before between the gender dimension in research and innovation, or now inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation, and gender balance in research teams. This year, we published another position paper, which is driving forward inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation policies, with recommendations for the upcoming framework program in the European research area. And this summarizes some of the discussions we had with in a workshop with some of the most experienced research funding organizations we organized in the framework of the GenderActionplus project. Some of the discussions may be useful for you. For instance, the difficulties for research funding organizations in making intersectionality operational in their sex gender analysis policies. We also discussed a bit about resistances that try to frame all the discourse and all our efforts towards intersectionality as an additional burden, both for researchers and for reviewers and for the staff of research funding organizations. So this may be interesting for you to stimulate your discussions within your research and innovation institutions. And there are also some recommendations for the upcoming FP10, so at the Horizon Europe and Commission level, that may be useful as well for you. We, for instance, suggested to have additional indicators on the performance of the framework program in terms of inclusive gender analysis. Because we have had traditionally few indicators for this field compared to women's representation, right, and gender balance and decision making. So we proposed some indicators that could be useful to analyze how we are integrating these aspects in the proposals. For instance, the number of topics that stress the need to consider an inclusive gender analysis, but also the amount of reviewers that are trained on these issues, number of panels that include gender expertise to evaluate this aspect of the proposals. The proposals that refer to sex, gender, and intersectional factors, if we want to consider a qualitative perspective, as Sophia mentioned before, we would need to analyze the quality of these answers, of these proposals. And in the end, the number of scientific publications as a result of these funded projects that consider an inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation. Even if these recommendations are targeting Horizon Europe, this can be considered by research funding organizations and by national authorities trying to promote this, as we said before, national mandate or coordination policies, strategies to advance these policies. So this may be useful for you. Other recommendations that are included here refer to something stressed, for instance, in the chat, the need to provide clear guidelines for researchers and for reviewers, explaining the concepts as we have done before. And the third tool is the online course on the gender dimension in research and innovation for Horizon Europe NCPs. We developed a couple of years ago, and that it is available at the NCP Virtual Campus. Even if the course was designed for Horizon Europe NCPs, we try to support them since we were promoting this role and equip them with more gender expertise. Anyone can create an account at the NCP Virtual Campus and take for free this online course at any time, or maybe some parts of it that may be more interesting for you. This online course was at an introductory level, and it was developed with the contributions of the GENDERACTIONplus consortium, including the members of the advisory board, the gender sector of the DG RTD, Hanna Tenglerova, external consultants, and also dozen principal investigators in the different research fields that are conducting research projects from a gender perspective, including sex, gender, and sometimes an intersectional analysis as well. So you will find basically short videos because we wanted to be quite practical in our approach for this introductory course, but also some written material, quizzes, a repository with additional materials and links and guidelines produced by researchers, by research and innovation institutions, and of course at the end an evaluation questionnaire where you can get your badge after having completed the course. So the first units develop the concepts of sex, gender, from a non-binary approach, in case you want to have a look at it and go deeper in these concepts. The gender criteria that apply to all Horizon Europe proposals that are transversal to the whole program. And this means differentiating between gender balance, again, and the gender dimension of research and innovation as part of excellence, as Hanna Tenglerova explained at the beginning. There is another unit to introduce the NCPs on the concept of intersectionality, and there is a very nice video produced by Professor Yvonne Benshop, and some other links to explore a bit more on intersectionality. And then we have different units for the different research fields, providing examples, as I said before, by researchers themselves, explaining how they are considering these aspects in their research. And finally, there is a unit with some tips for NCPs that may be useful also for some of you who are research managers, for instance, and try to provide advice to researchers when developing their proposals. So we encourage you to take this course that considers this intersectional and non-binary approach when developing this aspect of the proposals. This was produced before the framework, so you will see this that we are in the middle of this terminological debates and search for from the gender dimension of research and innovation to a more inclusive gender analysis in research and innovation. And finally, there is another tool produced by a different European project, also funded under the ERA part of Horizon Europe, which is Inspire. And this tool will be presented by my colleague, Helen Schiff-Banker. She's also a member of the GenderActionplus project. So I would like to check that Helen.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Lydia, for all the presentations so far. And I'm happy that I can add here another support tool that we are currently developing. Yeah, it comes from Inspire, as you have said already, and it is based on research that we have done in Inspire. And it is research that was conducted in the innovation sector. So we look at this part of integrating the gender dimension in innovation projects, because so far we do not really know how such policies work in private R&I companies. And knowing a bit more what the challenges are there, what strategies they use, could possibly help us to engage the business enterprise sector more in this discourse and in applying these policies, as you mentioned before, Lydia. So what we did is we selected 4 different such policies and in 4 different countries, and we analyzed how these policies have been translated into concrete projects and how these policy designs were perceived by the researchers and innovators in these funded projects. And based on this research, we currently are developing a support package. This support package has 2 main target groups. On the one hand, research funding organizations or innovation funding organizations. So there the question is, how can they best support researchers and innovators? How can they also improve the reach out to this group? How can they align the terminology and the rationals that are applied in this field better? Yeah, and the other group are the beneficiaries, the applicants, so researchers in private R&I companies and innovators. And the question is here, how to best support them to develop the knowledge they need, gender awareness, but also knowledge how to apply this approach to their concrete ideas. So really support material that is coming from the practice, that is evidence-based from projects that we have analyzed in depth. And we hope that we can really develop a hands-on support package. Yeah, you have the link in the chat. It is not completed yet. It will be available in September. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Lydia, as well. Brilliant. We're actually now going to be starting to bring the event to a close. However, before we do, there are just some final bits of information. First of all, we have a very short evaluation form about the event today. It just takes a couple of minutes to complete, and it will really help us to design future events. So you will find the link in the chat. So we'd be grateful if you could fill that for us. So we've also created a web page, a sort of digital goodie bag for you, with lots of links to all the resources that you've heard about today. That's the link again in the chat, and the recording of today's event and the PowerPoints will be published and uploaded there too. And we will send you a link to let you know when all that is ready. Also a reminder, if you'd like to receive invitations to future events, please sign up to the Inspiring Era community on a mailing list to receive those. And also a reminder about the GenderActionplus mobilisation network that is being set up. So you are very welcome to join that too. So thank you all. It's now time to bring the event to a close. So I want to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for their excellent and very inspiring and useful contributions. Also to you, the audience as well, for your engagement as well. So thank you very much and goodbye.